My mantra has always been, when it comes to perimenopause, be prepared, not scared. It's what you eat the majority of the time that counts. Alcohol doesn't have any health benefits, but if it is a way of kind of catching up with people and socialising and it brings you joy, then, you know, we have to remain realistic, essentially. There is no point doing something for 2 weeks, you know, and then kind of going back to your normal way of eating, because that's this kind of yo-yo cycle, which I think isn't very helpful at all.
Hi, I'm Cary, and welcome to the Eat Nourish Love Podcast. For over 20 years, I've created events, raised over 4 million for good causes, and been lucky enough to meet some incredible people along the way. This podcast is about exploring stories and insights that really shape us, with inspiring guests from wellness, business, self-care and personal growth. It's about learning to trust our intuition and discovering what truly matters, and how, with hard work, belief and tenacity, we can make so many things happen. I'm delighted to welcome Emma Bardwell onto the Eat Nourish Love podcast today. We're talking no-nonsense nutrition that gets results. Emma is a registered nutritionist, menopause specialist and best-selling author, known for her evidence-based, straight-talking approach to women's health. Emma, welcome.
Thank you so much. What a lovely intro. Thank you for having me.
Well, there's a lot of story because I think you started in a different career that you then pivoted, didn't you?
I did, yeah. So in a previous life, I worked in advertising. So I was a copywriter. So I worked alongside a graphic designer, and I came up with headlines and things like that. Anyway, I was made redundant actually in my late 30s, and I just used that as a chance to pivot. So it's testament to the fact that you are never too old to do new things. And interestingly, I did something that I'd always loved. You know, I'd always been interested in nutrition from the age of, from a really young age, actually. And I'd done lots of short courses, but I used that opportunity to turn everything around. And I trained. I did a 4-year degree, and really I haven't looked back. I decided way back then that I wanted to specialize in menopause, and at the time, this is about 15 years ago, people were like, what on earth are you doing? Nobody wants to talk about that kind of thing. But it's actually stood me in very good stead, because from that point onwards, really, we are, talking about menopause more and more.
It's quite interesting, those situations in people's lives and our lives, that sometimes it takes something quite brutal like that makes us find the space where we really want to go. And I think it's quite interesting that as we're getting older and people get older, there's all sorts of things that we want to do, and actually it's a great time to be doing it because we've got time and we've got the energy still to do it. So it's great. You've just launched an amazing book called the 30 grams protein plan, which is a Sunday Times bestseller. Brilliant book. And I think the thing that attracts me about this and all your work is the simplicity of it, because it is so confusing out there. There's so much information out there. And because you run your clinic, I notice that, a lot of people are very confused. So how did it all begin?
Yeah, so it's a very good point. We are bombarded, aren't we, with kind of lots of different types of information, often, very conflicting information. And I think that it is incredibly confusing for women, particularly, to kind of sort through and kind of untangle, particularly when you are in midlife and you're juggling lots of plates, possibly perimenopausal, brain fog, not sleeping, dealing with elderly parents, possibly teenagers. So I wanted, my mission really is to make things as really clear and concise and actionable as possible. And so that was the premise for the book. People were coming to me and saying, please just tell me what to eat. And so in the 30-gram plan, essentially, that's what I'm doing. I am really kind of laying it out on the line so that people can, I mean, the book is actually, it's designed for men and women, but it's so that busy people can make sense of sometimes, you know, confusing kind of dietary messages really, really easily. And essentially, you know, there's 4 kind of principles. It's 30 grams of protein per meal, roughly, 30 grams of fibre a day, 30 different plants a week. And if weight loss is your goal, which for lots of midlife women it is, then getting into a small calorie deficit. Those are the 4 principles of the book.
So it's so interesting because fibre is such a big thing because it's such a forgotten part. I had a lovely conversation with Dr. Emily Leeming on the Gut Genius here. And, you know, people always thought of fibre as that sort of brown roughage that used to take in a bag years ago. So what was your story and your nutritional story, and why did this become so important for you?
When I was 42, which coincided with my retraining actually, as a nutritionist, I entered into perimenopause, I think pretty abruptly actually, and it really, really threw me. And essentially I wasn't getting the help that I needed at the time. I was being told categorically by my GP that I was too young, which obviously we know now is very much not the case. And so really what I wanted to do was kind of bridge the gap that I was seeing between evidence-based information and not just HRT, because there was lots of chat about HRT, but there wasn't so much talk about the benefits of nutrition, diet, lifestyle, those types of things. And so essentially I was doing my own research on me and then kind of translating it into actionable kind of points that my clients could, you know, incorporate into their lives and kind of easily do going forwards. So yeah, I really fell off a cliff when I was perimenopausal.
Oh, that's really interesting because you've written a book about that, haven't you?
Yeah, so my first book is called The Perimenopause Solution. And it goes into, I've written it with a doctor, so she talks very much about the medical side of things, of which, you know, HRT and lots of kind of non-hormone related pharmaceutical, you know, options. There are lots of them, so which is brilliant. But I think it's really important to point out that it's not the only piece of the puzzle. And even if you are able and want to use hormone therapy, you know, we still need to be thinking about our bone health, our heart health, you know, trying to prevent kind of risk of dementia and things like that. So it really is a very kind of joined up conversation, I'm hoping.
It's sort of almost been a conversation that we've avoided for many years. And actually, it's about being aware of it, where it's coming in the future and how we can prevent it. And so the young you understand about it, and you understand why exercise, the diet, all those things are going to make a big difference. Because I think for many of us, we thought it was a long, long way away. And actually, we didn't need to worry about it in our 20s and 30s. And I think this generation's really started to understand it.
I think you're absolutely right. I think for Gen X, so for my generation, our generation, we thought it was something that happened when you were old, you know, quote unquote old and kind of grey and wearing elasticated trousers. But actually, we know that the more kind of informed and educated and prepared you are, and I think really that starts kind of even mid-30s, you know, late 30s, the better you are able to kind of manage what can be a very turbulent time for women. It's not always, and I think the kind of the positives aren't really talked about as much because people tend to talk about things more when they are suffering, right? But yeah, I definitely, my mantra has always been when it comes to perimenopause, be prepared, not scared. So we want to really kind of educate women as young as possible so that they know how to manage this life stage because everybody goes through it, right?
So people come to you a lot in your clinic and practice, and they feel completely overwhelmed. What are the big symptoms of those people coming to you?
Yeah, I mean, the kind of poster symptoms that everybody talks about are things like hot flushes, aren't they? But actually, I think the most kind of insidious symptoms are more the psychological ones. So, losing your sense of self, losing that that sense of joy. Women often complain of just not feeling themselves, and they can't quite put their finger on it, but something has shifted, and they've lost their joie de vivre. I think there's a lot of brain fog, a lot of kind of loss of confidence, of that mental acuity. Women often talk about experiencing brain fog, not being able to kind of articulate themselves, not being able to think of words. And for a lot of my clients, they're really high up, in their careers. They've worked their way up, and then suddenly they can't do all the things that they were doing, presenting to a group of people. And so it's really debilitating. And I think what isn't talked about enough is the fact that this time of life and these kind of hormone shifts can make women feel very isolated and very alone, and very lonely. So I see lots of people who are perhaps giving up, high-flying jobs, or demoting themselves, or going part-time, or not saying yes to the opportunities that they probably should be, which is a real shame, obviously.
It's just quite interesting, because if you think about, think back to my mother's generation, my grandmother's generation, and was this? Do you think this was happening, but they just didn't talk about it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my mum was at the beginning so dismissive. Why are you always talking about menopause? Why is everyone so obsessed with it, of your age? We just sailed through it. And it's like, no, you didn't actually. I remember as a teenager, her not sailing through it at all. She was miserable and a nightmare. But I think probably they didn't have the kind of education and the awareness to put the two together. And I think there's also a bit of kind of, just suck it up. Women go through awful periods, and, we have these terrible periods. We go through pregnancy, and then we go through these kind of hormone shifts, and it's just part of being a woman. But categorically, it is not something that we have to suffer with. And thankfully now we have all of these options available to us. I've mentioned a few, hormone replacement therapy, but there's a ton of information out there that women and a ton of kind of options that women can use.
Do you think also that their diet and their lifestyle was different too? It wasn't so much, it was overwhelmed, the food, the way that our foods changed. So actually there might not have been so much disruption with the hormones, and I don't know, it's just I just posed that question.
Yeah, I think a lot of the women that I see now, and I know that this, I think, is why I had such a terrible time, was because I was going through an enormous family upheaval at the time. And I think that the stress that we are all constantly under and not particularly managing very well really, really does have a massive impact on hormones. So we know that when cortisol is high, our hormones are low. Women who are overtraining, for example, kind of over-exercising, their periods can stop, can't they? We know that obviously when you are in a very stressful situation, biologically, you're not going to be producing hormones because your body is getting pregnant will be the last thing that it wanted to do when it's kind of under this enormous stress. So yeah, I think we are all juggling a lot more now than our mothers were. Definitely, it has a huge impact.
Yeah, because you're right, you say, it's sort of, there's a lot of conversations. It's very much out there. And I think people are saying, oh, not another conversation about menopause. But actually, it's great we're having these conversations. But again, it's another area that's going to be flooded with all sorts of opinions and ideas. And then it's a question of how to simplify that and take out things that perhaps are not going to be helpful. So let's go back to the core idea behind the 30 grams of protein, fibre and plants, because people really need to understand about protein? Because I think in some instances you can take too much protein, can't you?
Well, it's quite hard actually to overeat protein, and that's one of the reasons I think why it can be so helpful, particularly for women who want to lose a bit of body fat, because it's so filling and so satiating. It's actually quite hard to overeat. But yeah, you can overeat anything, right? And the problem is that you've kind of alluded to this already. We are talking a lot about protein. You know, you open up Instagram or YouTube or, you know, everyone is talking about protein. There's protein water, there's protein popcorn. Everybody's kind of jumping on this trend. So it's important, but we don't want to become kind of hyperfixated on it to the point where we're displacing other important ingredients like fibre, like plant foods. And healthy fats, you know, so it's like we've got to remain balanced. And that's what happens, I think, in the world of nutrition. Very often we go too far in one direction. So my book is very much, and it's such a boring word, isn't it? But it is very much about keeping things realistic and keeping things balanced.
And so give us an example of what a plate would look like in terms of protein, fibre and fat?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So I always get my clients to think about a dinner plate, you know, half of it, not a huge one, half of it is going to be kind of salads, you know, vegetables, fruit, things like that, leafy greens. A quarter of it will be protein. A quarter of it, or slightly less than a quarter, will be your kind of whole grain, so things like brown rice, sweet potato, freekeh, you know, all of those lovely B vitamin rich whole grains that I think some people are really kind of a little bit scared of, sadly. And then, you know, a small amount of healthy fats. And essentially, if you're kind of thinking about that every time you eat, or the majority of the time that you eat, you're going to be onto a good thing.
Talk about the carbohydrate, because obviously it's almost a thing that everyone has to avoid, and whether it's carbohydrate and pastries but actually whole grains and vegetables are carbohydrates too. It's
funny, isn't it? Because carbs have got this really awful reputation, but actually most of the time when people are talking about carbs and you know things like bread and croissants and pastries, and actually, you know, that isn't just carbs, that is carbohydrates and fats and sugar. So, but I think we've really started to kind of demonize this word carbohydrate. And yeah, I'm talking about quality carbohydrates, and I'm also interested, particularly for women of midlife kind of and onwards, about the quantity of carbohydrates that they're consuming, because they can be really easy to overeat. So we're talking, you know, I've mentioned them already, but yeah, things like, and making, I think lots of people are like, well, I don't really know what to do with freekeh or millet or spelt, you know, these kind of ingredients that maybe in the UK we're not that au fait with. But there are brilliant, you know, pre-cooked pouches. Merchant Gourmet do this amazing range, and they are literally just the whole grain, a tiny amount of olive oil, and that's it. So really, really good, really convenient. I think there's a lot of demonization of processed foods at the moment too, right? But they can be lifesavers when you're busy.
Yeah, exactly. And I think people talk about white rice, brown rice, which grains they should have, and gluten-free, and it just goes on, doesn't it? It's a confusion.
Yeah, exactly. You know, you don't have to kind of worry to the degree that I think lots of people do worry about single ingredients. I'm always telling my women that it's what you eat the majority of the time that counts. You don't have to worry about the fact that you went out with your friend and had a slice of cake and you know, a really good kind of catch up, or I don't know, a glass of wine at the weekend. Obviously, we need to keep this, you know, with my nutritionist hat on, we have to kind of point out the fact that alcohol doesn't have any health benefits. But if it is a way of kind of catching up with people and socializing, and it brings you joy, then, you know, we have to remain realistic, essentially. And I'm not telling anybody to go out and drink because it's sociable. But what I'm saying is we have to, I think about the kind of 80-20 rule. 80% of the time you are doing what you can to, keep your body really nice and healthy. 20% of the time, you can go a little bit off-piste.
Talk to me about fat, because obviously nuts and seeds and avocados, but then you've got your yogurts. I think you've talked about it before. It's quite interesting about 0% fat and full fat yogurts. So how much fat should people have, in your opinion?
So I don't want anybody to kind of worry too much about the breakdown necessarily of fats and carbs and all of those things. I think if you are getting 25 to 30 grams of protein in per meal, which is in line with the book, if you are getting around 10 grams of fibre per meal, eating 3 times a day, so that's 30 grams of fibre a day, and that you are eating within your energy, i.e. your calorie requirements, essentially you can kind of break up the carbs and the fats in a ratio that suits you. Some people prefer to eat higher carbs, particularly if they work out a lot, because it's really nice, fast energy. Some people find that eating kind of higher fat fills them up more, and therefore it's more satiating and they don't feel the need to kind of snack in between meals. So I think there's a lot of trial and error, and I think there's a lot of personalization involved. You have to do what works for you. And I think that, there isn't kind of this one size fits all. But to answer your question, making sure that you are eating, a kind of small handful of nuts a day, half an avocado, that you're cooking with things like olive oil or extra virgin olive oil in your dressings and stuff like that. That's you covered. You don't have to go crazy when it comes to fats. And but fats are really important. They are the substrate for making hormones, for example. Without fats, your skin can start to look very lackluster. We need them for lots of different things, for eye health, for skin health. But yeah, you really, as long as you are thinking about fruit, veg, nuts, seeds, whole grains, legumes, spices and herbs, you're kind of getting those in pretty much on a daily basis. I wouldn't worry too much about the quantities of those things.
Why so many people made it so complicated? Because your simplicity here in looking at what we've just been talking about now in your book and things, it's a very easy thing to follow. But there are lots of things that people you say should eat this before that time. And I think we talked about seeds and all that. There's so much. And I think you can be following someone on Instagram or online, and then you get more and more confused because every bit of information is contradictory.
Yeah, it's so confusing, isn't it? And I think that's when women throw their hands up and they're like, I'm so overwhelmed, I'm just not going to do anything. So I think, and I say this probably on every podcast, but I don't know if people are actually doing it, but I think it's really important. If you're following somebody who is really confusing or scaremongering or, talking about lectins or phytates or, kind of putting the fear of God into you when it, about certain ingredients, honestly, I would unfollow them, mute them, work out what their credentials are. Are they actually qualified to be giving nutrition advice? I'm seeing a lot of people who are kind of self-proclaimed experts, and they're not at all. They were in a soap opera in the 90s, but they've just chosen to suddenly start writing books and kind of talking about hormones as though they are the kind of gospel. If somebody is kind of hyperfixating also on one particular type of food or ingredient, again, I think it's, there's a bit of a kind of red flag. So curate your feed, your social media feed, so that it makes you feel good and inspired and motivated, and that it's clear. There are a lot of brilliant people on social media, but there's also a lot of kind of dross out there, unfortunately. So yeah, does that answer your question? I'm not sure if it.
No, totally. I think it does, because it's always the question of we're all such individuals, and it's got to work for us, hasn't it? So rather than saying one plan fits all, it doesn't work like that.
Yeah, it's got to be flexible. It's got to work for you and your family and your commitments, your lifestyle, your taste buds. All of these things are really important, but it's also got to be sustainable. There is no point doing something for 2 weeks, to get a summer body, summer ready body, for example, and then kind of going back to your normal way of eating, because that's where you get into this yo-yo cycle, which I think isn't very helpful at all. Really, you want to be working out how you are going to eat now and for the kind of the ongoing, the rest of your life, really.
It's like a reset, isn't it? To just you just get your body so that it actually starts getting into the right rhythms, and it knows when it's full, because we've lost a lot of those things.
Yeah, exactly. I think, for example, something like intermittent fasting can be really helpful for some people, but there's this propensity for people to think more is more. So rather than just having a kind of 12-hour fast overnight, which is fairly normal, you're going to bed and you're not eating, I think, some women are like, well, I'm going to do it for 18 hours and I'm only going to have this little tiny window to eat. But actually what can happen is they're absolutely ravenous. And so you get to the point, let's say that you've fasted all morning, and it's like 2 p.m. and suddenly your willpower, you don't have any willpower because you're absolutely famished. And that's when things can kind of start to unravel. And then you start to overeat because, you're so knackered and hungry and hangry. So yeah, I think we've got to be a lot more realistic with our goals, our health goals, and we can't do everything all at once. You can't overhaul your entire diet in the space of 2 days. Prioritize what, have a really, I like to get my clients to kind of really put everything that they're eating under a microscope almost. Keeping a food diary might be helpful, not forever, but just for 1 or 2 days. And then you can actually see where your energy is coming in. How many coffees are you having? When are you kind of really reliant on things like sugary foods, perhaps because you're feeling really exhausted at 3 p.m. in the afternoon, for example. And then you kind of start to prioritize. You think of 1 or 2 things that you really want to work on. It might be just having a more protein-rich breakfast. Just do that for the foreseeable future, really kind of bed that in, and then you can start to kind of build on it.
What does 30 grams of protein look like?
So in the book, I really kind of spell this out, but it can look in, the beauty of protein is it can look like a lot of different things for lots of different people. There are vegan sources of protein, veggie, there's obviously meat. And I think for lots of people, when they think about protein, they think about meat. But yeah, it's very important to point out that there's dairy. So Greek yogurt is a brilliant one, I think. Cottage cheese. I'm always talking about cottage cheese. I think a lot of people are quite scared by the texture. You can blend it into yogurt, completely tasteless. It really helps to bump up that protein profile. There's things like ricotta cheese, normal cheese, is quite a good source of protein. There's beans. There are particularly edamame beans, the soya beans. They're really good. Even things like green peas. So you might not get 30 grams. You might not want to eat 30 grams of green peas because that would be an enormous amount. But I talk about this on my Instagram and in the book. I talk about kind of protein layering. So you're kind of stacking up different sources of protein to make up those 30 grams. But yeah, a small chicken breast is 30 grams, a piece of salmon, a kind of fillet of salmon or fish is about 30 grams. There's obviously protein powders, which I think a lot of people are maybe slightly reticent about using, but they can be quite a good, convenient source of protein. I wouldn't use them, obviously, for every meal, but I think that now and then they can be really helpful.
And what about supplements in terms of because I think you suggest eating oily fish, don't you, twice a week?
Yeah, so that's actually the government guidelines 2 portions, which lots of people aren't actually doing, myself included, actually. I find it quite hard sometimes, particularly as the rest of my family aren't that keen. So I think in that case, actually supplements can be really helpful. There's a very good, can I talk about brands? I mean, there's lots on the market, but there's a particularly good brand in the UK called Bare Biology. They do a fish oil, they do capsules. So if you don't like, the thought of a kind of fishy smelling oil, you can actually take capsules. And they also do a vegan option too, which is made from algae oil, which is incredibly effective. So, really good for eye health, heart health, brain health, and has anti-inflammatory properties. So those omega-3s that you get from oily fish, I would say is something that women should really be trying to kind of shoehorn into their diet if they're not already.
Why in particular?
For all the reasons that I mentioned, heart health, heart health, eye health, skin health, and the anti-inflammatory properties. Very, very important.
Which is massive, isn't it, as you get older? Because obviously the joints and the inflammatory and the arthritis and all these different things that are coming in. So you just want to put whatever that can keep it at bay, really.
And also for brain health, lots of women are worried about future risk of dementia, understandably so, because women are much more, 2 out of every 3 diagnoses of dementia are in women rather than men. And so this is very much something that we need to be thinking about. And omega-3 contains these 2 compounds called EPA and DHA, and they have been shown to be incredibly helpful for brain health.
That's so interesting. You have spoken a bit about exercise. What's your view on exercise?
Yes, so I'm not an exercise, I'm not really qualified to talk about this, but I can talk about it in a general way. Obviously, movement has lots of different benefits. It makes us feel good. I think for a lot of women, we kind of touched on it at the beginning, they are feeling quite invisible at this time. They are feeling quite small and maybe kind of overlooked a lot of the time. And I think particularly things like resistance training, so, lifting heavy weights, can actually make women feel a lot more empowered and a lot stronger. It's really good for bone health. And we now know that muscle is actually an organ of longevity. So the more muscle you have, the more metabolically active you are, the better you are at managing blood glucose. So, your muscles kind of act almost like a sponge. They suck up any kind, so if you are eating things like, if you're having basically it makes you manage your carbohydrates much more effectively, is what I'm trying to say. So yeah, lifting weights, but anything that works for you, that releases endorphins, that gets you outside, that makes you feel good. Maybe it's a group class, so you've got that kind of community aspect. But there's lots of things online now so that you don't have to go to a gym if that's not for you. Honestly, I think movement, exercise should be on prescription. And we know that, it helps with mood, it helps with brain health, it helps with all the things that I've already talked about, but also with digestion. A lot of women find that they become a bit more sluggish. The digestion is a lot slower because we know that estrogen helps for lots of different things, but it actually helps to move food through your gut. So when it starts to drop off around midlife, lots of women can find that they get quite constipated. The easiest and one of the quickest ways, apart from making sure that you're really well hydrated, is to go on a walk after a meal. It's incredibly helpful.
That's interesting. Exercising after a meal.
Yeah, but I'm not talking about like a huge workout. I'm talking about a 10-minute walk around the block.
Yeah. Fun enough, it's I've got dogs, so it's easy, so I have to get outside. And just walking out in the morning, and I have to do it in the morning because that's not true. I sometimes do it in the afternoon, but depending on what my routine's like. But I love that morning walk.
Same. Sets you up for the day, right? Gets you outside, listening to the birds if you're not listening to a podcast. Really, and it can be incredibly helpful for bringing on a bowel movement, bringing on a poo. And I'm talking about poo a lot these days because it's part of my job. But, lots of women are really struggling in that department. So, yeah, that movement can be incredibly beneficial.
Yes, because you think we've always said that walking is quite understated, isn't it? It's such a brilliant form of exercise.
Yeah, and everyone can do it, most people anyway. And it's cheap, it's accessible, you can slot it into your day. We're often talking about 10,000 steps, aren't we? I mean, that's just a number that somebody's kind of arbitrarily come up with. Actually, most of the benefits are seen at 7,000 plus, that is more, is not always more, but actually when it comes to walking, I think, just as much as you can do. But if you are trying to aim for 7,000 a day minimum, you're onto a good thing. And if that feels like it's quite far off for, listeners, then just incrementally kind of building it up as you go, I think can be really helpful. And splitting it up across the day, because 7,000 steps is probably just over an hour. Not everyone can afford that kind of time first thing in the morning, but you could break it up into kind of 4 15-minute chunks.
But I think it's quite interesting because actually if you decided to get up and you're on the phone or you're on a phone call and you walk around, when you can tot up the steps, can't you, from just doing small things?
Oh, absolutely. And like my kids, I'm always moaning about them being really lazy, but actually me running up and down the stairs to go and get them stuff, doing, hoovering, doing the washing up, all of that. Yeah. Walking on while you're on the phone, it really does add up. Yeah. It's amazing.
My next podcast that's coming out is with a stretch specialist, Roger Frampton, who's amazing. And he always said, you've got to remember that we are living in 2025. So to say you shouldn't be doing this and sitting at the desk is worse than smoking. Actually, we are sitting at desks. So what we have to do is put things in place to compensate that, as opposed to beat ourselves up to say we're sitting all day.
Yeah, we've got to keep it realistic. So I think just even setting something on your phone to remind you, because it's so easy to get, really kind of bogged down with answering emails and sitting in front of your computer all day. It's what I do. I spend most of my time actually in front of my laptop. So yeah, a reminder just to get up and move, it can be incredibly helpful.
So how did it feel when your Instagram went viral?
Well, I've been doing this for a long time. So it kind of, people are like, oh my God, you've got almost 100,000 followers. That's amazing. But I mean, I've been doing it for since 2015. So it has been, it feels like a long slog. Instagram is fun, isn't it? But it can really suck up a lot of your time. So I try very, very hard to not spend too much time on there. But, it's where my community is mostly. I spend a lot of time answering DMs. But to answer your question, it felt amazing. It's really nice to get that kind of exposure, I guess. And when things go viral, it means that your followers go up, and there's more of a conversation happening. And I do have an incredible, I'm not on X or, any of those, or YouTube or any of those, or even Facebook. I'm literally just on Instagram. And I think for the most part, particularly my audience, they're incredibly positive and really uplifting. And, they feed back to me. And I get a lot from them, actually.
Yeah, but you're giving us such great information there. Your recipes are great. They're a lot of them aren't complicated. Which is your biggest one? Was it the cottage cheese bread or something?
Everything has cottage cheese in it. I think my biggest one, yes, is the wrap that you put into a dish, and then you literally you crack eggs into it, whisk in some cottage cheese, put in some chopped red pepper, spinach, put it in the oven, and yeah, it comes out like a quiche. It's amazing. It's so easy. It's foolproof.
How do you come up with the recipes?
That's a very good question. So I kind of made a rod for my back now with this 30-gram thing. So I have, a lot of them are, like you say, they're incredibly simple, but I just tweak them. So my kids are on TikTok because they're teenagers. So they will often flag things up to me and say, you could do something like this. And I will kind of just tweak it. But most of them are things that I actually eat myself, and that's why they're very simple. I'm not a chef. They have to be really quick. I don't have much time. I've got 2 teenagers who are incredibly time consuming, and a dog. And so, yeah, everything needs to be dead quick, dead simple, no fancy ingredients. You know, we're talking cottage cheese here. Chia seeds is probably, or ground flax is probably as kind of exotic as it gets. But yeah, it works. People like it, you know.
Yeah. It's your chia seed jam I looked at the other day. I thought it was really good.
Well, yeah. And yeah, people are loving that, particularly made with the psyllium husk. And the psyllium husk is this, we've touched on fibre, haven't we? But psyllium husk is such a brilliant, it's not really a supplement, but you could kind of argue that it is. It's such a brilliant ingredient to have in your cupboard, your kitchen cupboard, because you can add it to baking, you can add it to cakes, you can add it to bread. So in the book, I've actually got a cottage cheese bread that has psyllium husks in it as well. So it's got the protein and it's got the fibre. And psyllium husk is amazing for filling you up. It has a lot of benefits.
It's interesting because actually I did a seed bread, and actually it's on my website. I did it years ago when I first did the set up Eat Nourish Love, and I think it was a picture of my daughter cutting it, and that's why I had the husk there as well. So lots of great ingredients. So it's lovely having them in your cupboard. But
they're amazing, aren't they? Because you can slice them up. You make them once a week, slice them up, and then freeze them, and then you've always got your own bread that you know exactly what's in it. You know, you can make it to your specifications. So yeah, I'm a big fan.
And you can toast it, and it's delicious, and I love it. It's like pumpernickel. That's not everyone loves it, but I love it.
Yeah, and when you toast it, actually, when you freeze bread and then you toast it, you get more of a certain type of fibre called resistant starch, which your gut bugs love.
So if you freeze it, you get more of those bugs.
It's the same if you cook rice and then cool it carefully and then reheat it, you get more. Also with potatoes, new potatoes that you've cooked, and then maybe you have them in a potato salad, again, is higher in a certain kind of fibre.
So where are you heading? Are you going to do another book? Actually, how did the book come apart?
Oh God, that's a really good question. So I do these online plans, 2-week meal plans, again, because people are like, just tell me what to eat. I just want it all mapped out. So I do a timetable. It's flexible, but if they want to follow the timetable, they can. And so it started off as one of these 2-week online plans. It was called the 30-gram plan, and people went crazy for it. I think almost 1,000 people, maybe over 1,000 people signed up for it because they were telling their friends, and then their friends were kind of joining in. And so it went stratospheric. And so on the back of that, yeah, I was approached to turn it into a book. And so that's what I did. And the book is now a Sunday Times bestseller. There is something about that magical number 30 that really kind of resonates with people.
Why do you think that's? Just because it's a simple idea?
So simple. People know that they should be, aiming for kind of 30 grams of protein per meal. They know that the government recommendations are 30 grams of fibre a day, but they don't know how to do it. It's like just what I've done essentially is to translate this science, and it's evidence-based science. I've just translated it into meals that people are really enjoying, simple meals.
It's funny because you say in your book, just tell me what people ask you rather, just tell me what to eat. And you say, I'll show you how to, with these guidelines of 30 grams of protein per meal, 30 grams of fibre a day, 30 plus different plants a week to help you lose body fat, feel energised, improve your metabolic health and support your gut and digestive health. I think also so many people come to you because of their skin or their hair or their weight, etc. And people are beginning to come to you and begin to understand the more of the metabolic side of their health now.
Yeah. Yes. So things like cholesterol, things like blood pressure, We know that, cardiovascular disease is the biggest killer of women, actually. And so particularly post-menopause, we become much more at risk of heart attacks and strokes and things like that. And protein, beautifully, synergistically, protein and fibre both work to not just build muscle and to fill you up, but to manage blood glucose, to regulate appetite, to keep your mood nice and stable. We know that fibre reduces the risk of all of those cardiovascular type diseases. We know that fibre kind of feeds our good gut bacteria. We've kind of touched on it briefly. And we know that that's incredibly important for reducing inflammation, for keeping your gut lining really nice and healthy. It might even, there's emerging research saying that your gut microbes may even influence how you metabolize hormones. There's more research needed on that. But, really kind of thinking about gut health is doing women a huge service. And the way to do that is to eat more plants and to eat more fibre.
You've talked about women. You touched on men. So how many men come to see you?
Not that many. I predominantly see women. But what happens is that the women find that they are feeling so much better that they then send their partners or, the men in their life. So, yeah, I'm all about women, to be honest. I think men, there's plenty of help for men out there. So my focus really is women all the way. But, I'm not averse to men, but they will usually be introduced by a woman in their life.
Do you know, it's quite funny because I had this conversation with someone else on the podcast and I agree with you. But I've got 2 boys and I see sometimes how they need a bit more help now. And if they listen to this, they wonder what I'm talking about. So you have to be careful, don't you, when you go public. But because actually I think sometimes it can be hard for them, but I think that's just looking at it from a mother's point of view.
I think it's hard for kids, for teenagers, for young people to, we think we are bombarded, but they are kind of exposed to so many more conflicting messages and so many more platforms on social media, aren't they? So yeah, it's very important, and I'm not kind of playing that down. I think there's also lots of conversation to be had around eating disorders and disordered eating in girls and boys and young people. There's a huge rise in it, which is really worrying, and I think a lot of that stems from things that they're seeing on social media and kind of, expectations and these comparisons.
There's also the breakdown of families sitting down and having meals together. It is something that we always do. We always go around the kitchen soon when everyone's home and the children are home. We always sit down together with the youngsters and it's so important to me is that food and cooking and bringing everyone together. And I think that's community, and that's people talk about friendship, loneliness, etc. It's such an important time to be with your family.
It really is, and it's not always possible. But yeah, like you say, when you can, just getting together and kind of digesting the day together over a meal, there's nothing like it, is there? And you're right, it is very much being lost. We are sort of all plugged into devices so much of the time, unfortunately. That also kind of loops right the way back to what we talked about at the beginning, where women are feeling, menopause can make women feel quite isolated and withdrawn. And I think that community aspect is a conversation that is perhaps we need to be having more of, so that women don't feel like they are the only ones feeling, completely mad being sent mad by their hormones. And when you start to kind of talk to your friends, if you've got friends, or online in an online forum, if your friends aren't open to having these conversations, it's so hugely reassuring.
I think it's huge. I had these conversations coming out now, and it's one of the things that I love about speaking to you and bringing people on here, because I'm so curious, I'm so interested in so much, and I've met so many people in the world that I've done and the work that I've done, and actually I'm the first one to say, oh, you've got to go and read this book, oh, you've got to go and try that, or have a listen to this, it makes so much sense. And it's just lovely sharing, experts and expertise like yours to other people through this podcast. Just tell me, what does a normal day sort of look like for you rather?
Very different, actually. So podcast recordings, things like this. I'm not seeing clients at the moment because I'm promoting the book, and that's taking up quite a lot of time. I do a lot of kind of writing for health magazines and articles and things like that. Lots of recipe testing. I am working on a big project that's taking up quite a lot of time at the moment that I can't really talk about. But yeah, lots of radio interviews and things like that. It's amazing. I love it. It's every day is very different.
Well, it's hugely exciting to have you on this podcast, and I think you've written the most amazing book, and I look forward to following your recipes. What are the I always ask our guests, what are the 3 things you'd like to leave our listeners with? Okay.
First of all, you are not on your own. We are, there are something like 12 billion women going through menopause in the world at the moment. So, and there is help out there. So please don't suffer in silence. That's the number one thing. Number 2, we touched on it. Curate your social media. Get rid of the people that aren't serving you well, who are making you feel weird or anxious around food. You can mute them, you don't have to unfollow them if they're friends of yours. And then number 3 is arm yourself with as much knowledge, evidence-based knowledge as possible. There is so much information out there. Podcasts, I think they're brilliant. You can, plug one in and get your steps in. So, it's like kind of habit stacking almost, isn't it? But yeah, arm yourself with as much information as possible, and don't be scared. There is so much help out there, and you don't have to pay a fortune for it either. There's lots of free information available.
Well, it's amazing. And thank you so much for everything you've done and for being on the podcast today. Can you just let the listeners know where they can find you and where your courses are and everything?
Absolutely. The best place really to find me is on Instagram. I'm at Emma.Bardwell. I have a website too, emmabardwell.com. And my book is available online and in all good bookstores. So yeah, you will find that easily if you just Google the 30-gram plan.
Thank you so much. And I'm sure our listeners will be listening to you, following you. And I can't wait to meet you.
Oh, that's so lovely. Thank you very much for having me. And well done for doing this. It's a really important service, I think, that you're giving women. So yeah, hats off to you. It's a lot of work.
Thank you. Well, I've loved it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Emma.